Today we celebrate the feast of the conversion of St. Paul. Now, St. Paul has a feast day along with St. Peter in June, but today we celebrate this particular event in the life of St. Paul when he was converted from the persecution of the church to actually being the greatest evangelist the church has ever seen. So we hear the story in our first reading today from the book of Acts that Paul is persecuting the church. He, in fact, is the one who consents to the first martyr of the church, St. Stephen. And he is continuing to persecute the church really vehemently. He hates Christians because he's a devout Jew who knows the law, and so he sees it as his own duty to do this. And he's going to Damascus to ask for orders that he might find anyone who belongs to the way. As Christianity was known then, it wasn't known as the church, or they weren't even called Christians yet. But he was saying anybody who belongs to the way, that he might bring them back in chains to Jerusalem so that they might be persecuted or that they might even be killed. But as he's on his way to Damascus, Jesus confronts him. And it's this great theophany, this manifestation of God in the desert on the way, that he's knocked down and he hears a loud voice in this great shining light saying, "Saul, why are you persecuting me?" And after that, Saul is blinded and he has to be taken by his men to Damascus, and he finds this disciple Ananias who's looking for him, who the Lord has told to look for Saul. And after this, he's converted. He regains his sight and he's totally converted to Jesus, and he realizes who he is, that he is truly God, and he starts preaching him as the Messiah. So Paul is converted from being the great persecutor of the church to being the church's great evangelizer. And I think it's a very hopeful story for us as the church, as Christians, and something that it can teach us as well. That first off, St. Paul, or Saul, was this great persecutor of the church, that he really hated Christians. But then he was converted to be this great evangelizer. And I think that sometimes, he's like the worst of the worst that the church could think of at the time. And a lot of times we can think of ourselves maybe as the worst of the worst, that maybe I'm so bad, like I can't even set foot in a church sometimes, or how could God ever use me? Because look at all these terrible things I've done. Look at how bad I am. But when we think like that, we're not understanding how God works at all. That he wants to use what the world might view as the worst. He wants to redeem the deepest parts of us, and that becomes the greatest vehicle for our conversion. Perhaps because of our sins, or despite our sins, he wants to use those for his greater purpose, to be great witnesses to the world. Also, that in this whole story, we see that Jesus is very concerned for his church, for the body, the church. When he confronts St. Paul, he says, Saul at the time, he says, "Saul, why are you persecuting me?" Jesus is being persecuted in his church, in his people. So he's very concerned for his church, and he will continue to protect his church. But he uses people like you and I to do so. We are to be his voice, to be the ones who defend and protect the church. Finally, Saul's heart is converted. It is softened so that he might serve the Lord, that he might be a great evangelizer in the world. So too, we are called to conversion. Perhaps it might not come in some great theophany, some great flash of light. We might not be blinded or thrown down on the ground. But the Lord is calling us daily to conversion of heart. We are always called to conversion throughout our whole life. And if we think we're done, then we're in for a big surprise, because we always are called to a deeper conversion, to a deeper love and knowledge of the Lord. And that means that we might have to be converted from certain ways of thinking, from certain things that we do. So what is it that in you today that might need to be converted? It might be pride. Maybe it's from the comforts that we hold on to so dearly in life. Because the Lord is calling us to be converted so that we might serve his purpose, to evangelize, and to be great witnesses of his love, like St. Paul, to the world.